March 5th, 1945. Georgia State Prison in Reedsville woke up before dawn. But in one wing, life stood still. There in the concrete silence, a specific smell reigned, a mix of cheap disinfectant, mold, and fear. In a death row cell sat a woman. Her name was Lena Baker. She was 44 years old. She was a mother of three, a black maid who had spent her entire life bending her back over cotton fields and in the kitchens of white people. She didn't look like a gangster or a cold-blooded killer. She was a small, stout woman with tired eyes and hands roughened by hard labor. She sat on the edge of the cot, smoothing the folds of her simple cotton dress, and waited. Lena was special, though she never wanted that kind of notoriety. In the history of the state of Georgia, hundreds of men had passed through these doors. But a woman? Never. She was the first and the last. Around 11 a.m., the heavy clatter of boots echoed down the corridor. It was the death procession, guards, the prison chaplain, and the warden. When the cell door opened, Lena didn't scream. She didn't fall into hysterics, she didn't curse, and she didn't beg for mercy. She knew that in this world, where skin color was a verdict, her tears wouldn't move anyone. "Lena, the time has come," the chaplain said quietly. She stood up. Her gait was steady. It seemed she possessed more dignity in these final minutes than all the men who had judged her. They led her to the execution chamber. It was a room with white walls, in the middle of which stood him, Old Sparky. That was the cynical prison nickname for the electric chair. It was an ugly oak structure, painted white, with wide leather straps and a massive helmet with dangling wires. It resembled the throne of some mad king. In the witness room behind the glass, people had gathered. They were all white men. Journalists, officials, witnesses. They had come to watch the state kill a woman. Lena swept her gaze over them. In her eyes, there was no hatred, just a deep, bottomless sorrow. She knew the truth these men refused to see. She was here not because she wanted to kill, but because she wanted to live. The guards helped her sit. The chair was too big for her. When they started buckling her arms and legs with the thick belts, she looked like a child trapped by a giant. The cold leather of the straps dug into her wrists. The warden attached an electrode to her right leg. Then he lifted the heavy leather helmet, containing a sponge soaked in saline solution to better conduct the current. "Do you have any last words?" the warden asked. It was a formality, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like thunder. Lena Baker straightened up as much as the straps allowed. Her voice was clear and calm. She didn't apologize for defending her life. She spoke to eternity. "What I done, I did in self-defense. I have nothing against anyone. I am ready to meet my God. My conscience is clear." She fell silent. The warden placed the helmet on her, covering her face with a black leather mask. The light vanished. All that remained was the smell of ozone and the hum of the transformer behind the wall, building power. In a moment, the executioner would flip the switch. But to understand why this woman ended up on the electric chair, we have to go back. Back to where the sun burned mercilessly, and Jim Crow laws were stronger than steel bars. To the town of Cuthbert, where it all began. To understand Lena Baker's tragedy, you need to feel the air of Cuthbert in 1944. It was thick, sticky with humidity, and heavy with unspoken tension. This was the Deep South, the heart of the Black Belt, named so because of the color of the fertile soil, but also because of the skin color of those who tilled it. Jim Crow laws operated here. They were invisible bars that split the world in half. There were fountains for whites and for blacks, schools for whites and for blacks. Even God on Sunday was different. Whites went to their churches, blacks to theirs. To cross this line meant death, or something worse. Lena Baker lived on that side. She was 44 years old, and life had given her no gifts. She was a mother of 3 children whom she raised alone. To feed them, Lena took on any work available. In season, she bent her back in the cotton fields under the scorching sun, tearing her fingers until they bled on the prickly cotton bolls. The rest of the time, she was a laundress. Every morning, neighbors saw this small woman carrying huge baskets of white people's dirty linen to wash, iron, and return perfectly clean for pennies. She was strong. She had to be strong. But in Cuthbert, there was a force against which muscles were useless. This force was personified by Ernest Knight. Ernest Knight was the local gristmill owner. He was 67 years old. To the black population, he was a terrifying figure. To the white population, a disgrace. Knight was a hardcore alcoholic. He always carried two things: a bottle of cheap whiskey and a loaded gun, which he loved to brandish at every opportunity. He was a white man in a racist state, which gave him absolute power. But because of his drunkenness and violent temper, Cuthbert's decent society shunned him. He lived in his own world, at the old mill, surrounded by bottles and malice. Lena and Ernest's fates intersected when Knight broke his leg. He needed someone to look after him, clean, and cook. Of course, no white woman would ever cross the threshold of his den. So he hired Lena. At first, it looked like a normal job. Lena came, cleaned up the mess, fed the old drunk, and went home to her children. The money was needed, so she endured his swearing and the smell of stale alcohol. But over time, the situation began to change. Ernest Knight felt a taste of ownership. He began demanding that she stay longer. He bought her alcohol, trying to make her dependent. He started spreading rumors that she was his woman. Gossip spread through the town. For the white residents of Cuthbert, this was a scandal. A white man living with a black woman. It was a taboo. Knight's son hated Lena for this, blaming her for his father's fault, even though Knight had fallen to the bottom of the bottle long before meeting her. For the black community, it was a tragedy. They saw Knight dragging Lena into his web. This wasn't love, as some cynics later tried to portray. It was a trap. Knight started coming to her house drunk. He threatened. He demanded. He used his power as a white man to force her to obey. He realized she was afraid of his gun and his skin color, which made him untouchable to the law. Lena found herself between a rock and a hard place. She wanted to leave, but Knight said a phrase that became prophetic. "If you try to leave me, I'll kill you." And in Cuthbert in 1944, everyone knew he would do it, and nothing would happen to him for it. Here is the translation of the next part. I've maintained the tension and the ominous atmosphere of the setting. The old gristmill owned by Ernest Knight stood slightly on the outskirts of town. It was a grim structure, steeped in the smell of grain dust, engine grease, and stale whiskey. For Lena Baker, this place became a private prison. What began as a job as a caretaker quickly degraded into something between slavery and a hostage situation. Knight considered Lena his property. When he got drunk, which happened every day, he became unpredictable. He could be pathetic, weeping and begging her not to leave. But a minute later, he would turn into a beast, brandishing his pistol and threatening to put a bullet in her head if she took one step toward the door. He kept her there by force. Sometimes he locked her up for days at a time. Lena tried to resist. She was a proud woman. Several times, she managed to escape home to her children. She would barricade the doors and pray he wouldn't come. But he did come. Or, even worse, the law came for her. This is the most horrifying part of the story. In a normal world, a woman being stalked by an armed man goes to the police. Lena did not have that luxury. The local Randolph County sheriff knew about the situation. But instead of arresting Knight for kidnapping and threats, he took his side. One time, when Lena escaped and went into hiding, the sheriff and his deputies found her. The exchange that followed illustrates the utter hopelessness of her position. The sheriff didn't offer her protection. He told her point blank, "You go back to Mr. Knight, or I'll put you in jail." This was not an empty threat. In those days, black people were often arrested for vagrancy if they refused to work for whites. The sheriff gave her a choice: be a slave at the mill or a prisoner in jail. Lena, fearing for the fate of her children who would be left motherless if she were incarcerated, chose the lesser of two evils. She returned to the mill. Knight, feeling the backing of the law, became completely emboldened. He realized no one would help her. She was nobody. She was a thing. He started driving her into town with him, forcing her to sit in the car while he drank at the local store. He paraded her around like a trophy. Knight's son and the townspeople watched with disgust, but their anger was directed not at the abuser, but at the victim. They accused Lena of keeping the old gentleman under her control. The irony was sickening. A woman held at gunpoint, was accused of controlling the man with his finger on the trigger. The tension mounted. April 1944 was sweltering. The air at the mill grew so thick with fear you could cut it with a knife. Lena knew this couldn't go on forever. Knight was becoming increasingly aggressive. He began talking about how they would go out together. She slept with one eye open, flinching at every rustle. She knew, sooner or later, he would pull the trigger. It was only a question of when. And that moment arrived on Saturday, April 29th. Saturday, April 29th, 1944. The day was stifling. The air above the mill vibrated with heat, and flies buzzed over piles of trash. Inside, the mill smelled of old wood, sweat, and the cheap whiskey Ernest Knight had been drinking since morning. He was in his worst state, a state of cold fury. Knight had just returned from town, where he had once again caught the sideways glances of his neighbors. His anger at the world, at his son, at his own worthlessness was seeking an outlet. And, as always, Lena became the target. Lena sat on the bed, trying not to look him in the eye. She knew that look. It meant trouble. "I'm going home, Mr. Knight," she said quietly. "I need to see to my children." These simple words were the spark that ignited the powder keg. Knight sprang to his feet. He grabbed a heavy iron bar, according to other accounts, a metal bed leg, and swung it at her. "You ain't going nowhere," he screamed, spitting as he yelled. "You leave me only when I say so." Lena recoiled, raising her hands to protect herself from the blow. But Knight suddenly dropped the bar and reached for the holster hanging under his arm. There was his pistol, black, heavy loaded, the very same one he had been scaring her with for months. A thought flashed through Lena's mind, sharp and cold as a knife blade. "Today he's going to do it. Today I will die." She saw it in his eyes. This time it wasn't a game. He really intended to kill her. The instinct of self-preservation, the oldest and strongest of all instincts, seized control of her body. When Knight raised the gun, Lena didn't run. There was nowhere to run, and didn't fall to her knees. She lunged forward. It was a desperate struggle. A small woman against a drunken but strong man. She latched onto his hand, trying to divert the barrel away from her face. "Let go!" roared Knight, trying to wrench the weapon free. They rolled on the floor. The iron dug into her fingers. She could smell his stench, feel his weight, sense his desire to kill. At one moment, the gun ended up between them. Lena felt the grip. She yanked it toward herself with all the strength that mortal terror provides. She wrested the weapon away. Knight didn't stop. He lunged at her again, reaching for her throat to strangle her. In that moment, time stretched. Lena raised the gun. She didn't aim. She just wanted to stop this nightmare. Bang! The shot in the cramped space sounded like a cannon blast. Ernest Knight froze. The look of rage on his face turned to surprise. The bullet had struck him in the head. He swayed and fell backward, hitting the wooden floor hard. Blood began to spread, mixing with the dust. Silence fell over the mill. Only somewhere near the ceiling, a fly beat against the glass. Lena stood over him, breathing heavily, still clutching the hot gun. She looked at the body of her tormentor and couldn't believe it. He was dead. She was alive. What would a real criminal have done? She would have fled. She would have thrown the gun in the river, run to the woods, tried to vanish in another state. But Lena Baker was a naive woman who believed the truth mattered. She thought, everyone knew he beat me. Everyone knew he threatened me. I was just defending myself. They'll understand. She put down the gun, stepped out of the mill into the blinding sun, and walked into town. She didn't go home. She walked straight to the office of Coroner J.A. Cox. She entered, took off her hat, crumpled it in her hands, and said, "Mr. Cox, there's been trouble. Mr. Knight, he attacked me. We wrestled for the pistol. It went off. He's dead." She confessed herself. She came to the authorities herself. She thought this would save her life. She didn't understand that the second the bullet pierced a white man's head, her fate was sealed. To Cuthbert, it didn't matter who attacked whom. Only one thing mattered. A black hand had pulled the trigger, and a white man had fallen. This was a sin the South did not forgive. Here is the translation of the fifth part. I have maintained the dramatic tone, highlighting the speed and injustice of the proceedings. Here is the fifth part. This is the story of a trial that was more like a lynching only instead of rope, they used legal papers. Part 5. The Court of White Hats, Justice in Half a Day. August 14, 1944. The Randolph County Courthouse in Cuthbert was overflowing. The heat was unbearable. The windows were open, but it offered no relief from the stifling air. The courtroom reeked of tobacco and sweat. The room was strictly divided by an invisible but impenetrable wall of segregation. White citizens sat on comfortable benches in the front. On the balcony, referred to as the colored gallery, black residents huddled together, having come to support Lena or simply to witness her end. Lena Baker sat in the dock. She looked small and bewildered. She still believed that if she told the truth, they would believe her. She didn't realize that the verdict had been sealed before the judge even struck his gavel. A jury of peers? The U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to a trial by a jury of one's peers. But in Georgia in 1944, these were hollow words. The jury consisted of 12 white men. Many of them were acquaintances of Ernest Knight. Some had likely drunk with him. To them, Lena was not a woman defending her life, but a black maid who had dared to raise a hand against her master. Their world rested on a hierarchy, and Lena had disrupted that hierarchy. The lawyer who remained silent. Lena's interests were represented by a court-appointed lawyer, W.L. Ferguson. Had he wanted to, he could have turned this into the trial of the century. He held all the aces. Lena had no criminal record. Knight was known for his cruelty and drunkenness. The sheriff knew Knight was holding Lena by force. The killing occurred during a struggle for a weapon that belonged to Knight. It was a textbook case of self-defense. But Ferguson did nothing. He called no witnesses for the defense. He invited no experts to confirm signs of struggle. He didn't even attempt to prove that Lena was a victim of modern-day slavery. His defense was a formality. He was simply going through the motions to make the court look legal. Lena's voice. The only person who spoke in her defense was Lena herself. She took the stand and told it exactly as it happened. About the threats. About the iron bar. About how Knight said, "I'll kill you." About how they wrestled for the gun. He was drunk and mad. I was scared for my life. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to go home. But the prosecutor played the card that always worked in the South. He ignored the facts and painted a completely different picture. He portrayed Lena as a jealous mistress. She didn't kill him out of fear, thundered the prosecutor, addressing the 12 white men. She killed him because he was going to leave her and go to Florida. It was the revenge of a scorned woman. It was a lie. Knight wasn't going anywhere. He was too dependent on her, but it was convenient. It allowed the jurors to avoid thinking about the fact that a white man could be a rapist. It was easier to believe that a black woman was an evil fury. A verdict over lunch. The trial began in the morning. By lunch, it was already over. The jury went to deliberate. They didn't need hours or days. They returned almost instantly. Verdict: guilty of capital murder. Without a recommendation for mercy. Judge William Worrell, an old man with a stern face, did not hesitate. That same day, not giving Lena even a night to process what had happened, he read the sentence. "I sentence you to death by electrocution. The sentence will be carried out at the state prison in Reidsville." Lena stood clutching the wooden railing. She couldn't breathe. It all happened so fast. In the morning, she had entered the court with hope, and after lunch, she was being led out in shackles as a condemned woman. Her lawyer didn't even file an appeal on time. He simply let the system swallow her whole. That day, justice in Cuthbert worked with the speed of a guillotine. A woman's life was valued at half a day of court proceedings. She became the victim of a double standard. If a white woman had shot a black man who attacked her, she would have been awarded a medal for bravery. Lena got a ticket to the electric chair. March 5, 1945. 11:25 a.m. We returned to the White Room in Reidsville Prison. Lena Baker sat in a massive oak chair. Her body was strapped down. Across her chest, her arms, her legs. She could no longer move, but her spirit remained free. Silence fell in the witness room. The men behind the glass stopped whispering. They looked at this small black woman, and perhaps, somewhere deep in their souls, felt the wrongness of what was unfolding. But the machine had already been set in motion. The Sixth Commandment says, "Thou shalt not kill." But that morning, the state of Georgia decided that this commandment did not apply to justice. The warden nodded. It was the signal. Lena looked at the world for the last time. She did not see the sun, only concrete walls and the faces of her executioners. She repeated her words, clearly and loudly, so that they would be etched in the records and in the memories of those present. I did it to protect myself. I had no intention of killing. I am ready to meet my God. The executioner placed the leather mask over her head. The last thing she sensed was the smell of a wet sponge and darkness. 11:26. The executioner pulled the lever. A current of 2,000 volts surged through her body. It was a cruel, inhumane method. Lena's body tensed in a convulsive jerk. The straps creaked but held her. The hum of the generator drowned out all other sounds. It lasted a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. Then the current was turned off. The body went limp. The doctor approached her. He placed a stethoscope to her chest. "The heart is still beating," he stated. The executioner grabbed the lever again. A second jolt. Another strike of lightning into the small body. Silence again. The doctor again. "She is dead." At 11:31, Lena Baker was pronounced dead. She became the first and only woman executed in the electric chair in the history of the state of Georgia. But the humiliation did not end with death. Usually, relatives claimed the bodies of the executed to bury them with dignity. But Lena's family was poor and terrified. They could not afford to transport the body or a lavish funeral. Lena was buried in a small cemetery at Mount Vernon Baptist Church on the outskirts of Cuthbert, the very town that had condemned her. The grave was simple. No one erected a monument to her. No one wrote an epitaph about injustice. It was just a mound of earth that quickly became overgrown with grass. The whirl here is the translation of the final part. I've ensured the ending carries the emotional weight and sense of closure, however bitter, that the story demands. For decades, Lena Baker's story was a ghost haunting Randolph County. It was whispered about in kitchens, but in official offices, silence was preferred. Her grave became overgrown with grass, and the wooden cross rotted away. It seemed the world had forgotten the woman killed by Old Sparky. But blood does not remain silent. Lena had descendants left behind, and among them was her great-nephew, Roosevelt Curry. For Roosevelt, this story was not just a family legend, but an open wound. He grew up listening to the elders' stories about Aunt Lena, who was taken away and never returned. Becoming an adult, he decided to do what the state had failed to do: restore her dignity. First, he found her grave. He cleared the weeds and placed a modest concrete headstone. But that wasn't enough. He wanted to clear her name. Curry turned to the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles. In 1945, this board had denied Lena signing her death warrant. In 2005, Roosevelt gave him a chance to right that wrong. August 2005, Atlanta. The board meeting was historic. Lawyers assisting the family presented the case anew. They didn't look for new evidence. The old evidence screamed of innocence louder than any new facts ever could. They simply asked the board members to look at the 1944 case through the eyes of people in the 21st century. The arguments were undeniable. Self-defense. Knight was armed, drunk, and threatening murder. Coercion. Lena was held against her will. Judicial farce. The trial lasted a few hours. The lawyer was passive, and the jury was biased. The board members, this time including African Americans, were shocked by how obvious the injustice was. They realized, if the trial were held today, Lena wouldn't even be charged. She would be recognized as a victim of domestic violence who saved her own life. The decision. The board delivered its verdict. They admitted that the denial of clemency in 1945 was a grievous error. They noted that even if the jury wanted to punish her, the maximum charge should have been manslaughter, punishable by a few years in prison, but certainly not execution. Lena Baker received a posthumous pardon. It was the only case in Georgia's history where a person was pardoned 60 years after execution. The ceremony, on August 30th, 2005, on the 60th anniversary of her death, Roosevelt Curry received the official pardon document. He stood before the cameras, holding a sheet of paper that should have saved his aunt's life, but arrived when only bones remained of her. "This burden is lifted from my shoulders," he said with tears in his eyes. "Now she can rest in peace." Epilogue: The price of delayed truth. Today, a beautiful headstone stands on Lena Baker's grave. Carved upon it are the words she spoke before her death. People bring flowers there. In Cuthbert, there is no more segregation, and black and white children go to the same school. But Lena Baker's story leaves a bitter aftertaste. The 2005 pardon is a victory for truth, but a defeat for justice. Justice is needed by the living. It can no longer help the dead. A pardon document did not resurrect a mother of three. It did not erase the horror she felt when 2,000 volts pierced her body. She became a symbol that the system can make mistakes, and those mistakes can be fatal. Her portrait now hangs in museums, reminding us of dark times when skin color determined the value of a life. Lena Baker was a small woman who simply wanted to live. The system killed her body, but it could not kill her story. And in the end, the last word belonged to her. "I have a clear conscience." The end. Dikely. Lena Baker's name began to fade. The residents of Cuthbert tried to forget this story. Whites were ashamed or pretended nothing had happened. Blacks were afraid to mention her name aloud, so as not to invite trouble. It seemed Lena had vanished forever. Her case gathered dust in the archives, and her grave was lost among the weeds. But truth has one property. It cannot be killed by electricity. It can sleep for years, for decades, but sooner or later it sprouts through the earth. It took 60 years and a new generation to hear the voice that they tried to silence in March 1945.